All right, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that intro. So yes, I'm Britt Myers. I am a director of product at Noom. Like many people in product, I started my career not in product at all. I started as a music producer, and spent about like 10 years building a business in music production and entertainment production before I shifted to like the second 10, now 11 years of my career in tech and product. I've founded a few companies and sold two of them. I started off in product building games and developed a early app store hit called Welder, modest hit, very modest hit. It's still in the app store, still has a nice little fan base. It was the age of the app store where like you didn't have to work as hard to get a lot of people to just download your app. I then co-founded Homer, which is an early education mobile app that teaches kids how to read. And I was the CPO there for its first 150 or so thousand subscribers. And I joined Noom in April 2021 on a new product for Noom called Noom Mood, which I'm very excited about. And I try to develop Welder on the side still, but mostly just to make sure it like still works on iOS 15 and with the new iPad mini and things like that. So today I'm going to talk about user interviews and like qualitative gathering and using qualitative feedback. You might be a user, but you are not the user. Maybe you're not even a user, but I feel like most, I don't know, I feel like you should be a user at least. I think that like for a lot of my career, I have been very much a user of the products that I've built. Noom is like started to sort of deviate maybe a little bit from that, although I have certainly used the Noom Way product. But Noom Mood is a newer product. And a kind of a little bit of a different audience. I read this once. This is my little framework for the evolution of a product person's career, which I didn't exactly follow this, but I've seen this. I've read about this. I've like seen this in other people a little bit, where like you start off with some level of God complex of like using your intuition to build products that you think should exist. Or in my case, it was gaming. So like gaming, I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a carve out there slightly, but not really, not the most successful games. And in my case, I had like a very good success in gaming, very much like intuition based. And if you look at my word game Welder, it doesn't look like any other word games because I didn't really think about market dynamics and my users in particular. But it all worked out until it didn't. And then like you shift gears and then you start to become more like data driven and more focused on the sort of data aspect and like being able to sort of have some type of like reproducible positive results. And you maybe spend like a few years in the sort of like more data driven like age of product management. And then over time, over maybe the course of, many years of doing it, you become more measured to like where you can kind of have your intuition and creativity are really more about like synthesizing the sort of inputs you get from a whole lot of different sources. And so I guess like, and I bring this up because I thought it was like I've read this. I didn't come up with this. I read this somewhere and I mapped it to my own experience a little bit. But anyway, one of those like kind of inputs is users and talking to users. I find I get a ton of energy from this. I didn't initially, like I definitely like for the first like number of years, it was I don't know. It was like I was a little bit more, a little bit too arm's length, and then I've sort of learned to really embrace and in a way like that. Users are kind of like my I want to get to know them as like family or something. I mean, they might give me as many problems as my family too, because I might not be successful in meeting their needs. But but I've particularly in the last 5 years, and particularly at Noom, have become very invested in my users. And I think also in particular, like with Noom Mood, which is a newer product for Noom, and I've done like a lot of exploration in terms of talking to users and understanding user needs. And so the ways that I've generally have recently used user interviews is one, to like understand user needs, either like broadly looking at broadly to understand like the strengths and the gaps of the product in terms of serving those needs, but also trying to understand why a particular experiment that we ran succeeded or failed. And then another way that I'm going to talk about less today is being more tactical in terms of interviewing users about particular solutions, like putting together prototypes of ideas and working and presenting those to users in some way, and understanding kind of whether that solution kind of meets their needs. But the sort of first one is where I'm going to take a little bit more of a look today. So how to find your user, how to like start here, recruiting users. You certainly want to segment. I mean, you don't want to segment too much, but like you're gonna get very different responses from very different segments. So like one is sort of like looking across the user journey of like new users, retained subscribers who've just gone dormant, or those who have like canceled. And then also certainly like non-users, like people that have never used a product before. And there's different channels to speak with those people, but I'm going to cover that less today. And like another dimension that is really critical is kind of within each of those segments, like what particular experiment they're on. Like Noom runs tons and tons of experiments, and the particular experiment is going to create a different experience for that user. So targeting based on experiment can be important depending on what I'm kind of looking for. Some type of user actions, maybe they bought a particular upsell or something. I do this like a little bit less because it starts to kind of bias and constrain the segment a little too much, but that's certainly like when I'm being really tactical, we'll look at target users based on like specific actions they've done. But what I've done like quite a bit of is targeting based on survey responses. And that's where I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And also like, if I've interviewed them previously, maybe I'll want to kind of reconnect. So surveys. I love to cover the whole user journey with some various forms of qualitative measurement and getting feedback through surveys, and then have a system internally to feed that information through so that I can easily see it, understand it, digest it, and do something with it. For Noom Mood, we have one in the mid-trial around day 10. We have one when users cancel. We have, I send out more like one-off campaigns to like retain subscribers kind of over day 30. And then surveys for canceled subscribers. So I first started at Noom in April, and Noom Mood was kind of an existing product that had been built very recently. It was announced and launched kind of more broadly in October. But it was built out of a lot of the components of Noom, Noom's existing product. And if you're not familiar with Noom, Noom is a weight loss product that really goes into like the sort of psychology of weight loss and like your relationship with food. And the program is already fairly like based in psychology, but Noom Mood is a product that helps. It does not focus on weight loss, but focuses specifically on mental wellness and helping people improve their ability to cope and respond to stress and anxious feelings in their life. And this is, I mean, obviously particularly relevant right now. Noom Noom has a curriculum where you learn about either weight loss or, in the case of Noom Mood, mental health, mental wellness. It has various trackers. In the food case, it tracks like the food that you eat, and then you can track your weight over time. In the mood case, it has a mood tracker. And then there's a coach for both mood and for weight. They're like different coaches, but it's like a live human coach. And so it'd been built like fairly quickly out of like these various components. And I was brought in to lead the product to product market fit. And this was certainly a product that I was not a user of, and I would not have necessarily been a user of. And one of the first things I did was try to figure out like who are the users today, and like what are their needs, and like what are they getting out of the product today? How are their needs being met today or not? So I started by sending an open-ended survey to existing subscribers. I'll go into the details of all of these things. I tagged and analyzed the results. I identified users to interview based on these results, and then conducted a whole series of open-ended interviews. And then that very much informed the product strategy and roadmap and the prioritization. So the survey I used was what's called How Disappointed survey. It's outlined in by the Superhuman CEO in the article that I've linked here that I could share in the chat later on. But I think it's a great survey and a great approach, and I'll just give you the quick skinny on it. So it's asked these 4 questions. How disappointed would you be if you could no longer use Noom Mood? So you either choose very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed at all. And then the next 3 questions are totally open-ended, like what types of people most benefit from Noom Mood? What is the main benefit you receive? And then how can we improve it? And it's fairly straightforward, but I love the strategy, and I'm not taking any credit for it because this was, I don't know if it was the Superhuman CEO or someone else who came up with this, but there's a bunch of readings on the internet about this particular survey. But I found it very effective. And the idea is that there's so many things you could do to improve your product, but you've got to focus and these responses help you focus, that you want to understand what your biggest fans, the very disappointed people, like most about the product, and then understand how to address improvements to win over ambivalent users, which are the somewhat disappointed users. And the way you do this is by looking at the top benefits for that question of the very disappointed people. Like, what do they like the most? Like, they love the educational aspect about mental wellness, let's say. And then you look at people that are somewhat disappointed that have the same benefit. And these are open-ended questions, so you got to do a lot of tagging to on every response, on every question. Then you look at what that particular segment of somewhat disappointed people want to see improved. And this can help you give you a very actionable and focused list of kind of where to direct your efforts. So somewhat more specifically, if very disappointed users mention their top benefits were A, B, and C, then you look at the somewhat disappointed users who have the same ABC benefits, and then they might say, well, I want X and I want Y, and I think Z needs to be improved. And then you can also look at what the very disappointed people also saw as the things they wanted most improved, and that kind of can become your roadmap. And it's a lot more focused than looking at people that don't like your product but would like it if X or Y, because it's just you're so far from winning them over to begin with. So sending the survey out, so I got a greater than 5% response rate on this. It really depends on your industry, your product, the segment you're using. If I go after new users or cancel users, it's much less. But with like existing subscribers, I got a very decent response rate. I send it out through Braze. I use a survey in Typeform and then put the results in Sheets. And one like really cool trick I found with Typeform is it has this feature called hidden variables. And it's so cool I'm mentioning it here, that you can pass user attributes like through the URL into Typeform through into Sheets. And so I can have one big survey response sheet with all these responses. I can add in all the tags for every response, or at least every response in the somewhat and the very disappointed crowd. And then I can also have like experiment tags. So like if they were in X, Y, and Z experiment, can show up like right next to their response. So it gives me like a great surface to dig through every possible bit of feedback from users and like reach out to them immediately. I have their email address like pass through into there as well. I do a lot of analysis of response. So I try to take like all of this like open-ended subjective feedback and turn it into like numbers and percentages. So I like tagging everything and then segmenting the very, somewhat, and not disappointed users by all of these tags allows me to kind of get there. And the nice thing about the very, somewhat, and the not disappointed buckets is that you can run the survey every month and see how that number is improving. I mean, the same way you can do for NPS, but I particularly like this survey. I find it it gives you a lot of really actionable and focused data. So from there, I would pick out users who kind of gave like very common responses or responses in particular areas of interest. So in Noom Mood's case, there was comments about the coaching, there was comments about the curriculum, there was comments about the activities that we asked you to do every week. There's comments about the mood logger, things actually they're not comments about it, like is this kind of a bad sign, but I would pick out like common responses of things, areas that I was interested in, and follow up with interview requests. So this is obviously very tactical, showing you like what I'm actually sending to users, but I just feel like it's like I'm trying to create like I'm trying to make it very personal from the beginning. Like I'm not sending it through like userinterviews.com or some like other service that goes into spam with a bunch of like stuff on it or whatever. Like I just send out like just a straight email from my email inbox. I actually use Superhuman to like template this up, so it kind of makes it go faster. I use Calendly so they can book directly in my Google Calendar, like just trying to keep it just super low friction for people and incentivize it with $50 Amazon gift card. That seems to work pretty well. It seems like a pretty good deal, 30 minutes for $50. And the response rate has been around 10 or 15% of emails of people I email like I actually do an interview with. So I'll do like 5 at a time so I don't get my schedule overloaded. And I do this generally every week. I mean, the holidays slowed down like a little bit in the beginning of January, but like December was chock full of user interviews, like across all different types of exploration. Anyway, starting off like just being very personal and direct and kind of easy with people. And so now like the conducting of interviews. Obviously there's like tons written about this. It's very much a practice that you have to have a disciplined and methodical approach to it, and remove your bias as much as possible. And you have to do it. You have to do it a lot. You kind of just have to dive in and do it a lot. For the first couple that I did with these Noom users, as I was sort of getting to know them a little bit, like I was terrible at it, but just like doing more and more and more and more, I got better at it. So because these are sort of some of my principles for it. So right off the bat, like trying to make some kind of personal connection, and like this should not be cheesy, and should not be like creepy, and should not be like too specific, but I try to like infuse it through the whole conversation, like that just that through my tone of voice and my responses to reflect that I have a lot of empathy. I mean, these are people that are using this product because they have a lot of stress and anxiety in their lives. And so it might be different if you were talking to a gamer or something, but like for these people, like they're dealing with a lot of serious shit. And I respect that and respect the challenges that they have. And I try to really get inside their shoes and not like have a tone of voice of like sympathy or like feeling like, you know, like I really try to be empathetic. You have to have some kind of script going in, and you should like the script will like evolve over time. The first script will not be as good as your last script, and you'll sort of like learn the kind of phrasing of the questions that kind of work best. But you really want to be very open-ended and not lead at all, not offer any kind of solutions in the way that you ask questions. That is really critical, and not asking like yes or no questions, or even just like questions like, do you like this feature or not, or something. Like I really try to like to give them like a lot of latitude to say how they feel, and really and try to double click on like on areas where I feel like I'm getting to the like heart of how of like their needs. And you know, it takes time, and you have to be patient with it. Like within an interview, you may not, in 30 minutes, you may not get to like, it may be pretty like rote until like minute 24. And it just takes time for people to open up to you. And that's why I try to like just infuse like ongoing empathy through the entire conversation. Because it does take time for people to tell you kind of really what they feel. And this stuff is also very personal, and I'm not like their doctor or their psychologist. And so providing a space where they can feel comfortable, because I really do want to hear it. And I'm not like looking for, you know, like a particular answer. And then I take quite a lot of notes through it. I let them know too. I let them know like like if you hear me like clacking, clicking, clacking, like I'm taking notes, because I don't want them to have any kind of moment of distrust, because otherwise it's gonna like ruin the interview. I won't get like reasonable responses. How can you tell if I just got the question, how can you tell if you've had a successful interview? Can you tell as it happens, or is it more apparent afterwards when you're doing some analysis? I usually can tell as it happens. Because some are duds. Some are like, I mean, I definitely get more duds in the new users and the like canceled users, because they're just like, well, I just didn't like it. You know, well, I just didn't, you know, they're just some people like won't, like just refuse to go deep. What's I think interesting about the Noom Mood like existing subscriber who's been with us for a little while is that like there's the mindfulness of the curriculum, I think has rubbed off on them, and that's why they've like stuck around and they're successful. And so I think for those users, I do get like quite a lot of introspection that is very powerful. But I mean, it really depends on the person. Sometimes, you know, just between any two people, it's just like no matter how hard you try, you can't sort of like click with them. But I know it like as I'm going along, and I try to put us out of our misery. If it's like 20 minutes in and I feel like they've offered what they can and it's just not clicking, you know, it's just like, oh, you know, thank you, and this has been so helpful. But sometimes I'll go longer. Some people are just can be extremely open, and I can end up with an outsized number of insights from one person sometimes. How to handle biases and responses because only active users will respond. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is a very critical point in terms of creating a product, like trying to reach product market fit, and like moving from kind of where we are today to kind of where we need to go. there is, I think, like you can only go so far with existing users in early products. I think they have like a lot to offer in terms of what's successful about the product, but you do have to engage non-users. You do have to do broader market research and user research on people who like have like don't associate Noom with mental wellness and you know like are completely foreign to it, to better understand like a broader market needs. Like that's not really in the scope of this particular talk, but is absolutely like something that we do at Noom. So then from the next slide, kind of next steps. I mean, first you have to do a ton of these. I mean, like I think you can get like pretty good directional data about a particular area after 8 or 10. But sort of broadly looking at like to sort of broadly understand the product as a whole. I mean, I did 25 or 30 of them, and I just kind of I keep doing it every week because it just I feel like I'm often learning something new. I'm often launching new things. The product is changing. The market is changing. The season is changing. Like I just like I just never rest on my laurels with it. But in terms of sort of like particular projects, like I might be digging into like a particular experiment, for example. So we've like recently we launched like a huge fail experiment. I mean, it just completely bombed. I mean, oftentimes experiments will be flat and sort of a little bit better, a little bit worse. And I had one that just completely bombed. I was like, I got to figure out like why this happened. And I interviewed 8 or 9 people that were on that particular experiment arm, and it was really hard to tease it out. Like the first couple, it was like not obvious at all, but I would get like little signals from people, like since something seemed a little out of order, like just seemed wrong the way to describe it. And I would go look at like the quantitative data, like go into Mixpanel and look at like a particular area, like are they, like, is it possible that like I've actually added a bunch of friction here and I didn't realize it in this one spot. And so can be a little bit of archaeology when you're like trying to evaluate an existing experiment, but ultimately like whatever the particular project is, you got to synthesize all these findings. Like you can't take any one user's kind of reflection as truth, even though you can go so deep with kind of any one user. And then from there to make it actionable in some way, whether that be iterating on a particular experiment, like updating the prioritization. But I also put this thing like absorb their needs. Like I really try to be a chameleon to my user base, and to whatever degree like that, like I can absorb what their feelings and needs are, like, and infuse that throughout the design process and throughout the prioritization process. It's like doing product is just a very nuanced field, and to whatever degree I can sort of through osmosis like absorb and then use that to better the product and see it through their eyes on a sort of more regular basis. I try to do. Top 2 questions you asked during an interview. So I guess one thing I did at the beginning is I think introducing yourself is really important. Not just saying your name, but telling them what you do in a very plain way. Because like within product, it's very easy to sort of jump to like inside baseball talk, and like to be just very matter of fact. Like I'm a product manager. I work to make the product better, and one way I do that is by talking to people who use the product. Like just something like super straightforward. The other thing I like to say, and it was true for a while and it's becoming less true every day, is I just started at Noom in April, and one of the first things I did was send out a survey and you responded to my survey, and I really liked your response, and I wanted to talk to you about your experience with Noom. Like really simple, straightforward like that. That like I'm complimenting them in some small way. I'm saying that like I'm objective. I just got here. Like I'm like, I didn't like this. This is like kind of like this is not my baby. Like I want you to give me your most like unfiltered perspective. And I found that I feel like that kind of setup is important. I guess top two questions. One, that just like the very first question I usually ask them is just like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And sometimes sometimes it'll be like a lot deeper than others. But tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Noom Mood in the first place. Like really understand their intentions of like why they're here. And most people I've found will be open about that and some of the real life stuff that they're dealing with. And that just kind of, I kind of go through there. I try to walk through their user journey to whatever degree that they can kind of recall it from, maybe weeks or months later. The other question I did for a little while, particularly for like longer term subscribers who have been successful, is what advice would you give to a new person just starting to use Noom for the first time? And I found that to be, I would like get really interesting responses from that. In a way, like you could take all those responses and it become like the roadmap for like the new user experience of like, this is the instruction manual of like what we need new users to feel and understand when they first start. Yeah, so those are probably the two top ones. Anyway, so that is my talk. I'd be love to take any and all questions. I also want to just do a shout out that Noom is hiring product managers right now, and feel free to not be a stranger and reach out to me, and I can tell you all about what it's like to work at Noom. But yeah, I would love to take any further questions or any questions I missed on the chat. Oh, we have a Q&A too. Okay, sorry. B2B products. The question is, any thoughts on how applicable your approach would be for B2B products, or what would you do differently in a B2B context when it comes to collecting customer feedback? It's a good answer. I've never worked in B2B, but I will tell you that Noom has a B2B product where we sell Noom to employers who offer it to their employees. But my focus is really on the employee experience and the end user experience. And to date, that which works for the end user consumer has kind of been applied to those users, but I really haven't done any work in B2B firsthand over the last 10 years. And so I can't really answer that question probably very effectively. Any other questions?
Yeah, folks, please.
Britt.
Oh, good.
Oh, sorry. You said you've done about 25 to 30 of these total so far. Is that right?
I did 25 to 30 for that first project of like how disappointed. I've probably done like 50 over the last 9 months or so, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Like 10 months.
That's great. And,
yeah.
And do you have a target, or are you just trying to kind of talk to as many people as time will allow you to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I do on my quarterly, like on quarterly planning, we have our OKRs, and I set a target there. It's like more like a kind of bullet point within a broader goal, objective, but generally I try to do two a week. Like generally at the beginning of the week, I send out an email to 5 people, and usually I'll get 2 responses. If it's like an existing user, if they're existing users, or maybe I'll send out to 10 people if it's like a different segment of like newer users. Sometimes I'll be like more targeted too, where we launch we're experimenting with this or that new thing, and I want to, or maybe did some demand testing or something, and I want to like dig into a very specific subset of users. But yeah, I try to do 2 a week.
Looks like we just got another question in the Q&A.
I'm laughing because I mean, I haven't really been out and about much in the last 2 years, but I did always love MAU, not just because it was in Las Vegas, but I found the talks there to be very good. It stands for Mobile Apps Unlocked. There's lots of like marketing talks, but I really like to live across the full spectrum of consumer touch points and understand tactics like across the whole stack. So I really liked MAU. But yeah, no, I haven't been to conferences in a while.
Britt, I have a question for you as well. And
Yeah.
folks, if you have any others, please drop in the chat. First off, thanks. I think this was really a very engaging and interesting walkthrough that you gave. I'm definitely going to be sharing this with my team as well. But the question I had for you was, I think you alluded at a couple points to, for example, running an experiment and then using this method, whatever you want to call it, to kind of digging into the reasons for some of the data that you may have been seeing on a larger scale. I'm curious if there are examples where you use this in kind of the opposite relationship of user insights that you get from these interviews then lead to larger scale, more statistically significant studies. And if so, how you'd kind of think through that process.
So taking sorry, say that again. Taking user interviews these user interviews leading to a larger, more sophisticated study.
Not necessarily more sophisticated studies. What I'm trying to ask about is really just whether there are times where you take an insight from these interviews and then try to reinforce that with some sort of an A/B test or something that can be more statistically significant.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. So certainly on iterations of experiments, I've launched a few experiments now that have failed in the first like week or two in like very confusing ways. And so like digging into exactly why that is, one of my tools is user interviews, and that would like prompt me to prioritize those particular changes in the experiment, but also, yeah, I guess, I mean, I think that probably it happens quite a lot. I would say like quite a lot of, well, the thing is like it's really, I think the user interviews are more about like understanding the underlying needs and the problems that we're trying to solve. And there's like lots of different ways that you could solve it. And users might suggest like a particular way to solve it. But there might be like other ways to solve it that's more effective. And so I think just across my entire prioritization list, like these interviews influence like how I think about like those solutions that I've prioritized. I guess, yeah, so I think I both like in like very specific examples and also just like more generally, I think it absolutely does like inform like future A/B tests.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. Looks like we got a small flood of questions in while you're answering that as well.
During a user interview, how do you distinguish that your questions are regarding the Noom Mood user experience as opposed to specific counseling advice, experience, or results? Not totally sure what specific counseling advice, experience, or results. I mean, I think generally everybody I'm speaking to, yeah, I guess I just don't understand the question quite. Brian, do you read it differently?
I think my interpretation of that, what they're trying to ask is, how do you make it clear you're asking about the app and the experience they have with the app versus the experience they had with their specific counselor or
the advice
that they got?
Yeah. I mean, I think the distinction's pretty clear, but yeah, no, people definitely have a lot of feedback on the counseling. And in those cases, I can often work directly with the coaching team to sort of unpack some of that feedback. I think that the coaching is not live; it's asynchronous, text-based coaching. So I think just in terms of like the specific answer to the question, I think like it's pretty clear what like when I'm talking to them, it's pretty clear that they're like they don't have a problem distinguishing between like the functionality provided and like the specific counseling that they're given. But I certainly get a lot of feedback on the coach responses and how they like their coach, or they didn't like their coach, or if they didn't use the coach, or if they thought it was a robot or whatever, you know, like I get lots of feedback on like that particular area. Yeah. How often do you reach out to the same user customer? Do you worry about too much influence from particular voices? I mean, yeah, I've actually only done it a couple of times, and usually that was around, like I wasn't reaching out for more kind of broader feedback and exploration. I was looking to discuss solutions. So there was like a particular feature that was like very clearly missing from the original design, and a lot of people called this out. And so then when I built like a prototype for that solution, like I built the prototype in Figma, then I would share it with a particular like user who had like called it out as like a thing that they were missing at the time. So the only follow-up was kind of like to have like a slightly different kind of conversation where we talked about solutions instead of just trying to talk about kind of problems and user needs more broadly. What are ways in which you capitalize on feedback from company advisors and academic researchers or subject matter experts? Good question. So Noom has quite a lot of support in this area, particularly on the sort of psychological side, and there are some psychologists at Noom that I've worked with directly in terms of providing better solutions. Then there's also sort of other support in that area at Noom, in terms of like scientific advisory boards and things like that, and I've participated in some of those discussions. So yeah, I think that like, I guess those discussions I think have more influence like the specific efficacy of the product. And I think one thing that I've loved about Noom is that like our metrics are both like business and efficacy based. Like we have like revenue metrics and like engagement conversion metrics, and then we have efficacy metrics, and they both matter to Noom. And obviously we need to make money, but like the efficacy is really at the center of all of our design. And I think like the scientific advisory board and the coaching team and the psychologists at Noom have really helped me prioritize how to make the product more effective. And that's very much been at like the heart of why I joined Noom. So it's been very fulfilling to work with those types of domain experts in building product. Could you share a little more information about how you use Typeform sheets and how you use tagging? Yeah. So Typeform has this feature called hidden variables. You got to read the documentation. It can be a little confusing and requires a bunch of testing, but you can pass a variable into a URL, into a survey URL. And so the user won't see it, but as they answer the questions, it's storing these variables. So I would store their experiment ID and whether they were on the control or the experiment arm. and I'd store their email address and like a user ID. And then when they submitted it, it would pass that along with all their responses into Google Sheets. And Google Sheets has an direct integration, and Typeform has a direct integration with Google Sheets. And so then in my across the columns in Sheets, I have like the various questions and this user's particular answers in a row. And then I have like their experiment ID and their user ID and their email address and whatnot, also available right there. And so I can easily add a filter onto Google Sheets and only show people that are on the experiment arm of a particular experiment and see their responses only. I do that quite a lot. In terms of tagging, I'll add, like in the how disappointed survey, there were like 3 open-ended responses. And so I'd add 1 to 2 to 3 columns after each one and tag them with something, and repeat that tag, across all similar responses. And I would actually, for like how to improve the product, there was so much nuance there. I added like subtags, like people would ask for some improvement to the content, and there's lots of, one could be misspelling, one could be tone of voice, one could be, a different, like area of mental wellness they wanted covered. So I'd add like subtags to that, and then I would use like if formulas, like COUNTIF and SUMIF kind of formulas to figure out like how of all the responses in the sheet, how many people have the tag of content or something for things they'd like improved. And then I would get the results would show me like percentage, a list of all my tags and the percentages of responses that were attributed to each tag to see kind of what was most said.
Britt, I have a second question. I'm wondering what happens when you share the results of your interviews across Noom in different departments. What does engineering have to say? What is marketing or sales? What is the response to the data that you're, or the I guess the customer feedback that you're gathering?
So at Noom we have like a template that we use to design any one experiment, a design template. And that template has like various sections that kind of all add up to like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And so, so certainly like a lot of these insights inform that those design docs, and they're like very in depth, and like whereas like a ticket in Jira might just say like, this is what I want changed or what I want built. The design doc is much more comprehensive in terms of the goals of the experiment and why we're doing it, like everything that led up to this moment that we decided to do this experiment, like like why, like all the research and background to why we're doing it. And then it has, the user stories and functional requirements and various tactical parts of it as well. But like, it's particularly cross-functional projects, but just, I would say every experiment, like everybody who works on building product at Noom, whether it be engineering or design or product or marketing or how we're positioning it, like everybody reads these design docs, and like that, the kind of background, the reason that we're doing it is like picked apart by everybody, including engineers, and it's critical for everybody to be aligned on like what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it certainly like informs that process, which can be very cross-functional. And then I think on like a sort of like quarterly basis as we're like planning out what we're doing in the quarter. The sort of synthesis of these findings sort of boil up to my kind of overall objectives and help others, inform others like of why like I've chosen these particular objectives for the quarter.
That's great. Sounds like you guys are pretty product led over there at Noom.
We are very product led. That's why I would love to meet anybody who's interested in joining Noom, because we're hiring lots of product people right now. Will the size be shared with attendees? I missed the first half. Yes, I think so. I will share these with Brian, and then you guys can take it from there, how to distribute.
Yeah, Ryan, you want to take that?
Yes, I should be able to. You know what might actually work is for folks to just reach out to me. So I can just drop my email in the chat. And if Britt, if you share the deck with me, I can share with people who want it.
Cool.
Well, I think also to the point, we'll be sharing out a recording of this as well in the coming days.
Yes, good point. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Thank you all for your great questions.
Yeah, thank you, Britt. Really appreciate you taking the time here, and again, leading to a very highly attended, very engaging session. So hopefully we'll be able to have you back at some point in the future again.
Awesome. All right. Well,
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Be well, stay safe out there.
All right. Thanks, Britt. Britt Myers, Brian Root Bernstein, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And yeah, check the Product Account site in the next couple of days for the recording of this webinar. See y'all next time.
Cool. Thanks.